Hello, everyone. Welcome to Concordia University's Fourth Space. Thank you for joining us for today's event, Promising Practices for Long-Term Care. To help situate you, we are streaming to YouTube live from Fourth Space, and we are located here on unceded Indigenous lands in Chichage, Montreal. Here at Fourth Space, we work with our university community to help mobilize knowledge. We co-create daily activities that examine research questions and projects and development across the university. And we're running today's event as a live stream Zoom meeting. So we welcome all comments and questions there via the chat. Those of you in the space, if you have comments or questions, welcome those also. Just raise your hand, we'll get a microphone over to you. With that, it's my pleasure to hand it over to our moderator for today's discussion, also professor in Department of Sociology and Anthropology, Kate de Medeiros. Welcome in.
Thank you. To start off the panel, I'd like to start with an introduction of each of the people that you're going to be hearing from. So we have with us Josephine Song Tak Lee. She's a certified music therapist and provides music therapy at the Montreal Chinese Hospital. She obtained an undergraduate degree in music therapy at UQAM in 2005 and later completed her master's in music therapy at Concordia in 2016. She's passionate about music therapy in medical settings with older adults. And before introducing music therapy at Montreal Chinese Hospital as a pilot project and later establishing the program, she worked at different units at the MUHC and in senior residences. The main goals of the music therapy program at the Montreal Chinese Hospital include establishing connections with residents, managing stress and depression, and encouraging positive interactions. Now, I want to introduce also Susannah Tam, who can't be here today, but for whom Josephine will be reading a few comments. So Susannah is an experienced finance executive currently serving as VP Special Projects in Sunshine Biopharma, which is a US-based NASDAQ-linked biotech firm. So from 2016 to 2020, Susannah was CFO at Montreal-based Montado Pharma, Inc. Susannah was recently nominated as an honorary member on the Montreal Chinese Hospital Foundation Board and continues with her mandate as a board member on Concordia's Alumni Association. In 2014, Susannah founded Canada-China Heart-to-Heart Foundation, whose mission is to promote medical knowledge exchange between Canada and China. Susannah holds an MBA from Concordia, specializing in finance and operation research. We also have with us Darla Fortune, who is an associate professor in the Department of Applied Human Sciences at Concordia. Her research focuses on the inclusion of marginalized individuals, particularly within community leisure spaces and practices. She's interested in developing broader perspectives of inclusion and working toward enhancing experiences of belonging for individuals most at risk of being stigmatized and excluded. Darla's recent work has focused on experiences of belonging for older adults in community spaces, such as community centers, art hives, and museums. And we also have with us Sandra Smele, who's trained as a sociologist at Concordia and York University. She's conducted and contributed to research focused on social gerontology, gender, care, sexuality, disability, racism, abuse, and inclusion for over a decade. Much of her recent work has focused on long-term residential care in the Quebec context and includes publications in the Journal of Applied Gerontology and the Canadian Journal on Aging. She was also a member for the research team on the project Reimagining Long-Term Residential Care, an international study of promising practices, and authored works from the project that focused on resident-centered care and reflexive research praxis. In addition to being the coordinator of expertise in inclusive aging, diversity, health, and well-being at the Center for Research and Expertise in Social Gerontology, she is also an affiliate of the Simone de Beauvoir Institute. So what an esteemed panel we have. Josephine, I will let you get started.
Thank you, Kate. So first, I will speak for Susannah, who is unfortunately cannot be with us today, but she wrote me what she wanted to share with you today, and she asked me to read it to you. So here it goes. This is from Susannah. Let me first apologize for not being able to join you today. Caught a rather untimely flu and believe it will not be proper to join the congregation. Let me explain what was my capacity in the music therapy program rolled out at the Montreal Chinese Hospital. I learned about music therapy when I was traveling with President Carr and university advancement to Hong Kong to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the Hong Kong chapter. After learning more from Professor Vayan Ko, who is a professor in music therapy, and with the help of a team from Concordia and the hospital, we put together a proposal to get funding to roll out this program in the hospital. Because of my past connections with the Chinese Hospital Foundation, which I have sat on that board as president for 3 years, I was able to secure funding to launch this program. Here are a few points which I think are helpful. 1, start small to minimize the startup costs. We started with a 1 day a week. 2, minimize or avoid or bypass red tapes if possible. So we launched the program as a pilot project. 3, keep good data reports to chart the progress. The program will speak for itself, which is certainly the case in the Chinese hospital. And 4, make sure donors are kept up to date on the progress. And make sure the foundation gets yearly progress reports, feedback from community or user groups, and copies of publicity, those articles that are published in different publications. And the foundation is now in its 3rd year of providing funding for this program. Last, 5, maximize publicity and expand the program. The more people know about it, the more support the program will get. And at the Chinese hospital, the program is now extended to 2 days a week. And we are hoping to expand the program more to the senior day center, besides offering services to the residents of the hospital. Funding has been secured. We are working on getting sufficient human resources at this point. And for your information, Chinese hospitals is not your typical CHSLD or the long-term care center. It functions more like a community hub with an outpatient clinic that serves the public, and a day center for seniors and children, also open to the public. Medical seminars are delivered in underserved languages like the Chinese, Cantonese, and Mandarin. And soon more medical equipments will be added so that more tests can be done at the outpatient clinic. And during COVID, the hospital served as a vaccination center. Hope this gives a flavor of the funding aspects. If I can be helpful to your fundraising efforts, Josephine will know how to get in touch with me. And I'm Josephine, so you can let me know, and I'll let her know. So I'll continue with my presentation, my part of talking a little bit about the program, the music therapy program at the Chinese hospital. So I am a certified music therapist, and music therapy is a discipline where certified music therapists use music purposefully within therapeutic relationships to support health and well-being. In the Montreal Chinese Hospital, residents are living with various kind of conditions which impacts their physical, mental, social, emotional well-being. So the music program, the music therapy, really serves as a means to establish connection with the residents and support their needs through various musical experiences, which can include singing together, listening to songs or music, playing instruments, whether it's percussion instruments or melodic instruments, or moving along with the music. And these musical experiences can be effectuated in individual or a group setting, depending on the residents' needs, their interests, and their therapeutic goals. And some of the goals, as presented earlier, include increasing socialization and participation, increasing focus and concentration, facilitating emotional expression, fostering positive memories, reducing agitation or sense of loss, promoting relaxation, and palliative care. And although my clinical experience is focused mainly on hospital settings and working with older adults, implementing this program in the Chinese hospital has to take more things into considerations, and specifically is the cultural aspect. And if you know a little bit about the Chinese culture, you know this, it is wide, and it depends on where you come from, when you came from. Are the residents the premier? I want to say in French. The first generation immigrant or the second generation immigrants, and that would have an impact on how they see music, how they see therapy, what is therapy, or how music can be meaningful or connect to them. For some, music might mean school when they're kids. Then they learn music, and after they become a little older, they don't touch music anymore. Or some of them they might link to the Chinese government. So there are different levels of connections of music to them, and also how they feel about singing or participating. In the music sessions, some of them, they might think that this is not for them. This is, if they feel that music is linked to children play, then they might think that this is too childish for them. Usually during let's say a group session, there are people who are more in the center, who are more willing to hold instrument, to play, to move. And there are also residents who might want to be at the outside, right outside the circle, and they might not really want to grab the instrument. They might not agree of singing because they cannot sing. But what I've noticed is that as long as I can convince them to let me start the music, to have the music going on, at some point and somehow they will participate. Some of them, they might start to move along with the music. Some of them, they might start to sing along or humming along or lip sing along with me. And also some who might seemingly be non-responsive. They would be able to concentrate or focus more in the music by opening their eyes and having their focus on me. So these are some of the observations. In individual sessions, in the video we showed earlier, who unfortunately we cannot show for the Zoom people who are there, sorry about that. For individual sessions, what you saw is that the residents that you saw, he likes to sing. He used to like to sing, but he completely lost his voice because of an operation. So in the session, he could still express himself through music by playing the xylophone, and also by tapping the drum. He was sort of conducting me to sing the song for him. And through sessions, not only the residents understand more who I am and what they can expect with me in the session, but also the staff member also understand better, and they can see how music can benefit the residents. And now they also understand why I would spend time with residents who are seemingly non-responsive, and they can also see the slight change in their facial expression, in their concentration, while watching me doing music with them. And this is a round of a little bit of the music therapy program. And at the end, what I want to add is that when I'm thinking about today's topic, promising practice of care, I think for me, being able to work in a supportive environment, having Susannah, who have helped me plan out the trajectory and to connect with the foundation, a foundation who is supportive to pass the budget for purchasing quality instruments, even if at the first phase of the project, in the pilot project phase of the project. Also, staff who are open-minded enough to see the benefits of the music, and also the hospital coordinator, which you heard her earlier, the way that she can explain what music therapy is. I think that reflects that she is really on the ground. She knows what is going on in the hospital, so she can explain it the way she explained. And this is really helpful for me, so I can really concentrate on doing music therapy without worrying that I have to prove myself, I have to explain my work. And so I think that this is a big part that really helps in working in this environment. So this is what I would like to highlight about this program. Thank you.
Thank you. And before we move to Darla, I should add that we'll wait until the end of the presentations to start a discussion. So if you have questions, please jot those down, and then we'll come back to those when everyone's had a chance to present. So, Darla.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Pleasure to be here. So what I'm planning to talk about today is really the role of recreation and leisure programming kind of broadly, which music certainly figures prominently in that, but in long-term care spaces to create relational communities and how that happens. So before I begin on some of the research projects that I wanted to talk about, one thing that was not mentioned in my bio, because I didn't put it there, but I figure it's important to state, is that I actually worked in long-term care myself for a number of years as the director of therapeutic recreation. So I kind of saw firsthand the value of recreation and leisure programming for this very thing, for building relationships within long-term care homes that help sort of create that sense of community within the home. I also find that recreation and leisure tends to really be thought about kind of for the individual benefits that it brings to residents more often than not, and not thought about so much about what it can do for the whole community of people visiting, people working, and people living in long-term care. So I wanted to talk specifically about 3 research projects that I had been involved with over the past number of years, where I think this point comes out in terms of creating the caring relational communities that we're talking about today. So the first study, the purpose of that study was to explore the role of recreation and leisure professionals in the culture change process in long-term care homes. Then by culture change, I mean efforts to sort of change the culture of care, the culture of aging within long-term care homes to be more of that, essentially be more of a caring community, caring space where people who residents, staff, and families can thrive, and where quality of life is paramount in those homes. The second study I wanted to draw from really explored the way natural leisure spaces, so kind of settings within long-term care homes that are not set up for like kind of formalized programmings, but just they put coffee out, they put tea out during the day, people gather informally, sometimes, as a social space, and what the value that those bring to enriching experiences and relationships within the home. And then the third study I just wanted to touch on briefly was research involving friendships for individuals living with dementia, both in long-term care and in community, but how relationships are sustained after a diagnosis of dementia, when the friends were, perhaps friends for years prior to that, and how that, they sustained that through some of the changes. So with the first study I mentioned on culture change, that was the first for me that really highlighted the value of recreation and leisure in that process. So we spoke to, for that study, a number of recreation professionals working in long-term care homes across Canada, and asked them about their role in the culture change process, what they thought, their role was, and share some examples of what's working well. And time again, we heard about just the value of leisure programming being not just for the resident, but for everyone. And so having, things like music programming, like outings in the community, games, special events, themed days that involved often, a lot of people prioritized or spoke a lot about staff involvement in particular. So we heard a lot about that, like staff, a nursing staff accompanying residents on a fishing trip, for example. Sometimes on their work day, sometimes people would want it to go badly enough, because it was of an activity of interest, someone who hadn't had a chance to fish for years and wanted to take part, for example, when on a trip, and just how that helped over time nurture these relationships, gave people something to talk about for weeks on end after this happened, sharing stories about the fish that got away, for example, and things like that, and joking, and really helping to build those types of relationships. Again, the emphasis often was on relationships between between staff and residents, but we did hear a little bit in that research as well about, visitors to the home and family members being involved and welcomed and encouraged to, excuse me, to take part in the recreation programming that was happening, and how that not only helped strengthen, in many cases, the relationships that, with the person that they're visiting, with their family member, but also with everyone else in the space as well. And we really heard that more, I think, even in the research around natural spaces that I mentioned, because there, again, when, very, very simple things, very simple gestures, as just having spaces that were left open for people to design or, kind of take part in that space as they wish, and putting things like coffee and tea and cookies out throughout the day on a regular basis, encourage people to gather, all people to gather, so residents, their visitors, whether it's friends or family, and talk with one another and really create that sense of community. And then in that study, it was interesting that we heard time and time again about, family members saying that they continued to visit after, in some cases their loved one had passed on, and they built enough of a relationship with other residents and with other family members that they continued to go and visit, long after that. So that was a really, strong part of their own community, which was really nice to hear. Another kind of thing that I really appreciated hearing from that particular study was the importance of care going both ways, I'd say. And in the case that when those spaces are there and when, refreshments are provided, residents can provide hospitality to visitors who come and, offer a cookie. And someone mentioned, a particular family member spoke to us about how striking it was that when they were growing up and went to visit their grandparents in a long-term care home, it felt very, very institutional. They didn't want to be there. It was, they were forced to go. It wasn't a pleasant visit. And how with their grandchildren now coming to visit their grandparents, it was very different. The grandchildren got excited to come. They couldn't wait to get a chocolate chip cookie. For example, there were fire pits outside. In the evenings they could have a bonfire and sit around and maybe have a sing-song around the bonfire. So it was actually a pleasant experience. It was fun to go visit, grandma or grandpa and have that. And the grandparents living in long-term care could provide those experiences. So much like, who doesn't, again, someone mentioned, who doesn't like going to grandma's house and, getting a cookie? Well, it doesn't matter if they live at home or in long-term care. In that particular sense, it should still be the case, right? And then finally, the third study I mentioned around sustaining friendships after a diagnosis of dementia. In that case, we also quite regularly heard from friends who had their friend living with dementia move into long-term care, but that didn't stop them from visiting. They would make it a ritual often to visit around a favorite leisure activity that they also enjoyed. So music came into play here quite a bit, where there was a favorite band that played every other Friday or something to that effect. And she said, well, that's when I visit, because this band is a favorite, plays some of my favorite music as well. So we enjoy that time together. We can go for a walk after, or sit and have a cup of tea after, or whatever the case. But I specifically plan my visits around what's going on within the home that I also enjoy doing, and that kind of helps to enhance our relationship and quality time spent together. So in all three studies, I think, as I mentioned, it's much more going beyond recreation and leisure for sort of the therapeutic benefit that it might bring to residents, and ideally it does, but it also does much more than that, and in a lot of these types of situations really helps relationships to grow and these caring communities to form. So that's all I want to say, I think, right now about that, and I'll certainly talk more if there's questions. So thank you.
Sandra.
So thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel and for organizing this entire week and a half of events, I believe. So I'm Sandra Smele. As Kate mentioned earlier, I'm at the Center for Research and Expertise in Social Gerontology. And the goal of that research center is really to put together the expertise of practitioners and researchers to improve health and social services for older adults. My role at that center as the coordinator of inclusive aging, diversity, health, and well-being is to make sure that all older adults in all of their diversity are receiving the practices and services that they need. And in relation to this, this theme of promising practices, I actually mentioned promising practices when I went to interview for this position, because you know, I am to contribute to practices that, as I said, meet the needs of older adults in all of their diversity. And promising practices is really about not trying to find the one inclusive practice, the one inclusive model for all older adults, but to recognize that variety of practices are necessary. We need to be thinking about multiple elements of identities of social locations when we're developing different practices. So I like that. I also was part of Pat Armstrong's research on promising practices, so I was already familiar with that terminology as well. And so I was going to speak to some of my experience as part of Pat's international study. I can speak to that as well. But I think what I want to do is just, and I was also going to speak, well, I will speak to some of the research that I did specifically in Quebec on bientraitance, which is translated roughly, and we still haven't figured out a good translation for this, but good treatment, how to treat older adults well within various contexts, including residential settings. And sorry, just as an aside, I'm also speaking to long-term care residences. Some people use the language of long-term care to describe the entire continuum of care, but I'm also thinking of it in terms of residences, that particular context. So yeah, in terms of what I will be speaking to, I want to speak a little bit more to the Quebec context in terms of promising practices. And I thought of 3 elements that I would speak to that would kind of not necessarily speak to the relationality that I knew that the 2 of you would be taking up a little bit more, but some other elements that also contribute to being able to develop those great relationships that both of you spoke about that are so essential to long-term care. If we're not thinking about the relationships that people have within those contexts and really supporting them, then we're not ensuring that they're going to be receiving good care and that people want to continue to work in those environments. So one of the elements I wanted to talk about was around promising practices related to sexuality and gender expression. So just the recognition that older adults are also sexual beings, also affective beings with feelings and emotions, how important that is to training those who are working in those environments, so that not only that this is allowed for, that there's a space for it, but that it's anticipated and that it is fundamentally supported. My colleague at CRIGES is at the Center for Research and Expertise in Social Gerontology is developing some training in this area that I think it will be really helpful for the entire social health and social services network. But some particular examples from some research on this. That was conducted by Marjorie Silverman and Alexandre Berry. They did some research on those who identify as trans and are experiencing dementia. And they identified a few promising practices that really recognize that, that gender expression can be fluid. And one of the promising practices was just to make sure that people have in their closet a variety of clothing so that they don't have to decide that they are going to be one gender expression. So that's just one example of something that, to keep in mind, and that staff need, to make sure that that's the kind of person-centered care that they're providing. Another thing in relation to that particular element I wanted to talk to was just around, as I mentioned earlier, sexual or affective expression. There's a need to recognize and support people in long-term care residences to be able to develop those kinds of relationships if this is what they want to do, and to support that and to support families through that, because sometimes it's not with the parent that a child had seen their parent with. So it's just to make sure that staff are able to support them through that, as well as supporting the individuals if that's what they want to do. Another element I wanted to talk about is, and I want to call it a promising practice, and I think it is, but it's really addressing an issue in long-term residential care around profitization. And so the advocacy work that's been done by a group that's called the Care Economy, that is addressing a particular form of privatization that is occurring in long-term care. There are a lot of international corporations that are buying up long-term care that don't necessarily have the interests of those who are receiving care and the relationships between everybody at the heart of their mandate. And this is leading to some negligent practices that are really clearly evident in the film Stolen Time. If any of you ever want to watch a film on that, it's set in Ontario, but we are also in Quebec, although officially 88% of the CHSLD, the long-term care homes, are public here, and they are slowly being subjected to the same regulations that, the private ones that are CHSLDs are slowly being subjected to the same regulations as the public ones, so the same staffing ratios, etc. There are a lot of résidences privées pour aînés, so private residences that actually provide a lot of long-term care, such that according to the research of Anne Plourde at the IRIS Institute, the Institut de Recherche et d'Information Socio-Économique, actually 92% of long-term care residences, if we're including those, are part of the private sector, and 86% of them are for-profit. And it's really privatization in that sense. It's the for-profit. It's not, non-profit facilities that are so concerning. And the reasons why they're concerning is there's research that has demonstrated, for example, some research by Pat and Hugh Armstrong in their book, The Privatization of Care, the Case of Nursing Homes, that there are more deaths among residents, for example, in these homes, and the working conditions are far worse for those who work there. So it's a promising practice in the sense that we're taking up this issue and we're addressing it, and that we can improve care more broadly that is offered in the long-term care sector. And then one final element, I hope I'm not taking too much time. One final element I wanted to talk about was workers, and this phrase that, again, Pat Armstrong has used many, many times, and others have used it as well, and I heard Justin Trudeau say it during the pandemic, that the conditions of work are the conditions of care. Within the context of Quebec, François Aubry has done a lot of work on the conditions experienced by PAB or care aides or orderlies. There are different terms that are used to describe that. And he's really written a lot about how conditions that don't attend to the well-being of staff lead to staff burnout and staff retention problems, and the importance of making sure that that their voices are heard, that their expertise is taken into account and it's repeatedly turned to. And what was interesting in a recent project that I'm involved on in Bien Traitant, so good treatment in residential care, is that they identified our World Cafe as a promising practice because it was an event at which everybody, the residences, the family members, and the PAB and the other employees could get together and discuss what they wanted this space to be like. And that was just really interesting because, we're doing a research project trying to hear from them what is really great, and they're identifying what we were doing, that kind of event, that kind of like integrating that into their processes as something that would be really helpful for their spaces. So I just think, I think it's really important to think about the working conditions because, as I mentioned earlier, François Aubry has done research for years on this, and staff retention has been a problem in this province, and it leads to not being able to develop these kinds of relationships and maintain them in the long term. So addressing that, I would say, is also a promising practice. So thank you.
So we have time now to open questions up to the audience. So does anyone either in person or online have a question they'd like to address to the panel?
If you'd like to raise your hand, we can get a microphone to you. And those of you online, you feel free to use the raised hand function, or you can drop your question in the chat and we'll read it out loud for you.
We have a question here.
Hi, thank you for those interesting questions. I live in Ontario, and one of the questions I have is during the pandemic, and I think continuing, one of the problems with staff was that a lot of contracts were being offered to personal care workers and nurses that were temporary. And so the personal care workers had to have multiple jobs at multiple residences and moved across, and we all know it spread the COVID virus, but also major burnout and precarious work, inability to support their families. Is that similar to what's happening in Quebec?
I wonder also if we can not only answer the question, but maybe each of you could talk a little bit about the role of the kind of the permanence of staff and how that might affect, say, the programs that you all work with as well. So Sandra, if you want to start.
Yeah. So actually, a promising practice I didn't mention, or a promising development here, has been that there is going to be a slow phase out of the use of temporary staff, agency staff. So in general, in the healthcare system, this is what has been promised. So that will partly contribute to addressing that issue. But understaffing remains a significant problem here. And that's why I wanted to speak to addressing the conditions of the work, because when you're trying to do this work and you really care about it, it can become so difficult to continue on when you're not able to provide the care that you want to provide, right? So that is a promising development here. More needs to be done, but that element of bringing in temporary staff from staffing agencies is being addressed by the ministry here.
The project that I'm now at with the Chinese hospital, it was developed during the pandemic actually, but then it couldn't start because of the pandemic, and we have to wait a little bit after the pandemic or when the measures are more loosened, so to start the program. But as music therapist, I know that like some of my colleagues, they were asked to do patient care during the COVID, especially if they belongs to the CS, and so there was a little bit about the at the time a little measure at the time, but then after the measure has been loosened, they are back to their position. Yeah.
Thanks for your question. I'm a bit hesitant to say too much. A lot of my work in long-term care was actually where I'm from in Nova Scotia, so I can speak to sort of that context a little bit. And then the research for me also was more in Ontario than elsewhere, I guess. But yes, that was very much highlighted. Well, both in my own work, as I mentioned, years back working at a long-term care home in Halifax, at that particular home, it was just sort of always a priority to have staff remain with the same group of residents, for that very purpose. I mean, other reasons I think too, of efficiency and whatnot, but from a care perspective, from a relationship building perspective, it really worked wonders when staff can be assigned to a specific unit. That's where they work, day in and day out, and get to know the residents really well. But we did hear that from a number of homes that were actively going through the culture change process, identified that as also a promising practice. So not just to be consistent to a certain home, but to be consistent to a group, for relationship building as well. So I'm hoping we're moving, more in that direction. That I think the more that gets highlighted and the importance of it is really key here for lots of things, but certainly for quality of care to be provided and relationships to grow. Thank you.
We have another question in the back, and then if there are any questions online after that, well.
Hey, thank you. This is a question about the community aspect that you were highlighting in in the long-term care homes. I was wondering how common is that these days, especially like between like more profitable versus non-profitable. How frequently do you find these programs? Yes, you, but also if anyone else.
All right, I can start, and then, yeah, sure. That's a very good question. In terms of common, again, speaking more from the research that was a few years ago now, I conducted that study where I spoke to recreation professionals in long-term care homes across Canada. And at that point, there was really active acknowledgement of the importance of it, I suppose, and movement in that direction. I know there are a number of homes, again, highlighting Ontario, where they've moved to, instead of, spaces in long-term care being floors, units, whatever, that kind of language, it was neighborhoods. And in this sort of neighborhood approach where, again, it'd be consistent staff, working within neighborhoods, a kind of a community sort of feel to it, moving away from structured programming even, like from a recreation and leisure perspective, and moving more towards kind of spontaneous, making all a variety of things available to residents to take part in and asking them what they're, what's your choice to do today? We could do this, or this kind of idea. Really prioritizing and making space for and time for staff to be involved. We heard that a lot as well, where, staff obviously would enjoy that. I mean, it's very enjoyable to spend an afternoon, involved with a music program, or again, going out into the community on an outing or something. It's kind of about allowing them to do it, I suppose, first off, making space and time for them to do it, appreciating that that's an important part of their job as well. So it's not just about, for nurses in particular, it's not just about the physical care, it's about care and all its senses, I suppose, and being really active, involved in residents' lives and building those relationships. So I don't quite know how common, but I felt really optimistic with that particular project that there are a number of people who are at least thinking about it and trying to get there throughout the country. And there's certainly a lot of homes that, people I spoke to had a lot of different homes from coast to coast who were really talking, sharing some key examples of that happening. So I did find it that encouraging, if nothing else. So I don't know if anybody wanted to add to that.
Well, that makes me think of our idea of trying to expand a program and to reach out to the Chinese community, so people not only think about Chinese Hospital as residents, but really like Susannah said, a community hub for the Chinese community. And I think we can learn from each other. I think that I'm already hearing some very great idea here, and how to bring it to each of the individual long-term care, and how we can connect together to do something together and learn from each other to expand the services.
Yeah, I would just say, you mentioned this off the top, that your CHSD is somewhat unique, right? Because there are other programs integrated into the same space. And I think, there's been a lot of research that has demonstrated that where homes are located, if they're located closer to other services, if there's transportation that's easy for them for residents and for those who work there to use, thinking about that. And if it's not there, then how can it be set up to make sure that it's easy for people to come in and out, and for other reasons to come into the home, so that these community ties can be created as well in that sense. So that needs to be taken into account, and it can be, and it is. And I think your example is a good example of how, you said a daycare is also integrated into the space, and there's the and the day program. I think that is what is needed, so that there's not just this one unique orientation of the space as well. But also what you said about having coffee and tea, that kind of a thing within the space really helps contribute to people having those chats you were talking about, around having coffee. So that's also been identified in other research as a promising practice. So.
We have time for, please go ahead.
Is it okay to add? Yeah. Something I just thought about actually in relation to your question, because you had, asked about the creation of community within the home, and as important as that is, I think, and what we want to highlight, there's also, something that always kind of bothered me, I guess, about long-term care from a recreation and leisure perspective at least, is this assumption that everything happens within the home once you move in there. And all your social needs should be met within the four walls of that home. And I'm like, no, it shouldn't. You're still a very valued member of a larger community. And I think that the more we appreciate that and can support that, the better off we are too. That really important to create community within the space for sure. I mean, people spend a lot of their time there, both people who work in the home and live in the home and visit. But I love when I hear stories about residents once they move into long-term care continue to going to their church in the community that they've always attended, or going out for lunch regularly with friends, and the transportation and things like that are provided so that they're able to still do that that kind of thing. So just really stressing the importance that they're not completely maybe physically kind of removed in the sense that they no longer live at home, they're living in a different space, but that space is still part of the community. They are still very much part of the community. So I wanted to just mention that before we move on to the next question. So thank you.
I think we have time for just one more question. Were there any questions online that?
There was one question online. It was just a question asking if there was a place to go or a phone number that to call for seniors that needed advice, or maybe more of a question around general resources available.
Oh, I don't know whoever's. Just need.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't have a specific phone number to offer, but you can get in touch with me, and I can offer those resources to you. So, and I don't know, I can share it with the entire group afterwards.
So I know we had a final question from the audience.
Thank you. Yeah, I have I thank you very much for your presentation, and I do have a question regarding resources. How important, well, I probably have a ton of questions. And I'll tell you where I'm coming from. My daughter is the volunteer coordinator at Jewish Elder Care. And I know, and she works, I guess she's in the recreation leisure department, recruiting volunteers to come in and do dog therapy, music therapy, various types of activities with the residents. And a lot of times, people are not paid. And some of the things that you've been talking about, I have a hard time visualizing, although their programs are very good. How important, well, music therapist, is it Suzanne? Joanne? Josephine, sorry. How important is the foundation and the extra money from the foundation for activities like yours? I don't see, I'm sure, or I'm guessing that extra activities need to be funded. What about? Okay, that's my question.
And we actually have more time than I thought, so my apologies. We have plenty of time for more questions, so please. I was off by 30 minutes, so.
That's good. I think that's an important point, and I think it is a reflection that is shared in all facilities. There are activities, there are programs that we would like to implement, but then we have limited resource or where to get the resource. In my case, we are lucky in a sense that we know Susannah, who is very supportive to this program, and she happened to have this connection with the hospital's foundation. in my experience of working in different residents, it's really about advocacy. You need to go there and tell them that this program exists and this is beyond volunteer work, and this is a well-established program, and we can try it out. And many times programs work out by, like this one, a pilot project. So what if we try it out for 1 day a week for a year? And usually when they really see the result, when they understand what the program is and how the importance of that, then they will continue to provide the funding for that. In my experience, I don't know if.
I appreciate your question because I was actually there in my role as therapeutic recreation director. I was also the volunteer coordinator simultaneously, so recruiting volunteers to come and help out with all of our programs, and they were hugely important to our day-to-day functioning for sure. Most of our quality music programs as well, people used to tease me because I'd go listen to live music a lot in the music in the community and then hit them up afterwards, like, can you come in next week, sort of thing. And anyway, so yes, I mean, certainly there's a need for more resources in that particular, across the board, but certainly in that particular area. I think one thing that helps, I mean, having a Susannah maybe is the short answer, I suppose, someone who's a champion to find funding, but it also, in my experience, has helped when you highlight the value of programs, and the more that you're able to do that, not just programs, but whatever the needs are, so that it can, people will support funding or put more resources to it. I know that's, it's not a perfect answer because there's still a need. I mean, I see it myself. I keep in touch with people I've worked with over the years who, would benefit from more resources, certainly, but with fundraising and things that they're actively seeking to support, outings and I'm speaking strictly from a recreation perspective, but outings in the community, or even funding for, to purchase a bus, for example, to have one at the home as opposed to having to rent, things like that. I think the community in general would get more behind a lot of those things when they see the value of it firsthand, or you can highlight the value of it quite clearly. So that's been a bit of a help, but I think there's a long way to go as well with, and we do, I think, volunteers are tremendously helpful, and there's a big need for volunteers, but there's a slippery slope there too with volunteering, or relying a little bit too much sometimes on volunteers to do the work that should be done by paid staff, for sure. Yeah.
Did you want to add?
No? Yeah, I completely agree, and I think we're pointing to that as well, right? Yeah. Valuing the work that you're doing.
But we had a question here. Did you want?
My question concerns the wisdom that the older people have. Is there a program that links the generations, that the wisdom and the guidance that the older people have can be passed on to a younger generation? I have something else, but I prefer not to say it. Thank you.
Why don't you start, Darla?
So yes, I would say, first of all, that is, I see that becoming more of a priority, or I'm hearing more examples of it, which is nice to see, and creating those opportunities for, so kind of partnerships or sharing and exchanges with students of all ages, high school students coming into long-term care homes. Things like, for the research I've done, we heard a lot of examples of, life stories, life reviews, and obviously intergenerational programming of all types is really valuable. And I really like and value that it can be a two-way exchange, certainly, where they learn from each other often, right? But certainly there's a lot of wisdom to be shared from the older generation to the younger. But I think I remember hearing quite often from the residents I was working with just how much they also learned, from about just sort of different trends today for younger generations as well, and appreciated that. And I remember sort of some examples of programs that I was actually involved with. I know this is sort of a stereotypical example when we talk about technology, but often, high school students or university students would come in and assist long-term care, like the residents living there, with technology, use and getting, playing some games if they love to play bridge, for example, setting them up so that they're able to play that online. And then the reverse of that often was a lot of the residents going to elementary schools and being involved with, I remember a program I really valued when I worked there was called Friday Friends, and they'd go read, to the elementary school students every week on Fridays. And there was a knitting program as well in one of the high schools where older adults would go and lead that so that high school students could learn to knit and develop some other sort of skills in that sense. So very much, knowledge exchange is really, I think, key to this.
Was there an evaluation, or did somebody assess what the older people? Did somebody assess what the older people and the younger generation? Did somebody sort of make some sort of subjective evaluation as to how effective the program was, or just the fact that the program existed was good enough?
In the examples I was giving, they're from when I was working. I know there's probably, again, programs beyond that, at other homes as well. And I'm a bit familiar, but I'm a little bit rusty right now on some research that has been done on intergenerational programming in long-term care. But I know, so I didn't actually participate myself in a formalized evaluation of the programs that I was referring to, but it was, built into the practice to regularly at least get feedback from residents along the way and get a sense of what they're getting from that. And we, that was always, every bit was positive, glowing, feeling like, again, they have gifts to get, to share with the community and opportunities to be part of the outside community and share those were really valued opportunities. Time and time again, we'd hear that. So, yeah.
When I was younger, I participated in a biography program where I went into a long-term care facility and I interviewed the clients, and I took their biography. And it was wonderful for me. I learned a lot about the residents' life, their story, and it was also helpful for the residents because they learned more about the resident and their needs and what they liked and what their preferences were. And I think it was a very interesting and lovely program. So there was an intergenerational exchange that I thought was just fabulous.
Yeah, it makes me think about my other role as a part-time faculty for the music therapy program, and I would have to say that long-term care facilities are great internship opportunities for our interns. They really learn a lot.
Your question makes me think of a project that I recently learned about that it's currently being developed. And what they're doing in that project is they're partnering with those who are responsible for the heritage. I don't know if I'm translating that properly, but the patrimoine, the heritage of the municipality that they're part of. And so they're partnering with them and with a local museum, and they're bringing in some of different objects from the museum that were around potentially around the time that the residents were growing up within their municipality. And they're creating an area in the front of the residents so that people can come in and visit and talk about these different objects together. They're having some problems around You know, because this is the thing within long-term care, the importance of attending to safety and hygiene and all of that without preventing people from being social beings, without preventing them from experiencing joy and having these types of activities. So there are a few challenges on that end, but they are bringing that in so that there are opportunities to talk about these different objects, these different photos that might be meaningful or that will be meaningful because they'll have selected them with the residents for those who come and come for a visit. But yeah, there are a lot of various, like there isn't one program across long-term care homes that is intergenerational, but there are a lot of ones. And I'm certain that they've been evaluated. Some are better than others. I don't have a promising practice in terms of that to offer, unfortunately, but I think it would be a good idea to look into that. So thank you for your question.
Marlene?
My question sort of follows from the last question, I think, because it's talking about caring with, and I think that's kind of new to these environments in a way. And I was wondering about training, because like I don't know what it is to be a musical therapist, and I'm wondering what training one goes through, and then how does all of this, what you've learned from your practice, feed back into the training of future generations of people who are involved in this area?
Music therapy is a master's level program at Concordia. So we belong to the creative arts therapies department. So and that's we have internships for our students, whether they are studying art therapy, drama therapy, or music therapy. And as I mentioned, the long-term care facility, it's a great opportunities for our interns to learn and to practice the skills.
Did you want to elaborate?
Thank you. Thanks for your question. Just to elaborate from recreation and leisure, there's also a degree. It's an undergraduate degree that's required to work in that position in long-term care, I think mostly at this point. So often we have a degree at Concordia, therapeutic recreation. Same idea with respect to internships, where before you graduate from that program, you're required to do an internship somewhere in the community, and if you're interested in working in a space like, long-term care, you would probably go there for about 560 hours, so really a semester-long internship, pretty in-depth. And then there's ongoing training opportunities for both staff and volunteers once you actually have the position in place, and I think this would cut across for a lot of positions, not just certainly recreation and leisure folks who are working in long-term care, but ongoing sort of workshops around dementia, it's sort of all sorts of things like that, like different culture change approaches, things like that are provided on a regular basis and offered even to volunteers that come into the home as well. There's certainly an orientation at the beginning. I would tend to think probably mostly that's a fairly minimal, over a day or two kind of thing, just the basics of coming in to volunteer and what to expect when you're within the home. But then there's many opportunities to continue.
It might be helpful also. So, in the whole world of, arts-based therapies, there are activities people, there are artists, and then there are art therapists. And maybe could you just make a distinction between those three groups?
Sure. Just within the therapy.
Well, I just mean, like, when we
probably?
talk about arts and long-term care, for example, sometimes people say, well, we do arts, but it might be arts and crafts, and sometimes artists come in.
Yes,
and they would
that's true.
distinguish themselves as different from art therapists. So
Right, yeah, a good point, thank you. Yeah, so there are actually, as I think I mentioned, even to touch on with music, from a recreation and leisure perspective, we provide, music, but it's not music therapy. So that there's a difference. It's music just, simply for enjoyment, like anyone would listen to, to music or alongside of a special event or something to that effect. Music therapists obviously have different, outcomes from those programs that they're hoping to achieve, and that kind of thing. Same thing with art. That's a an aspect of recreation and leisure programming from, I guess, more of an arts and crafts perspective. And then there's also art therapy, which again would be attached to more therapeutic outcomes for residents, and often done more, I mean, certainly small groups and individualized programming happening in that way with a music therapist or an art therapist. Again, so a bit of a difference or distinction there.
We did have a question in the chat, which I can read out. It's from Carly McCaskill, and Carly had said, care is like a circle that ripples out, and it is needed for everyone: staff, caregivers, volunteers, people who live in care homes, friends and family of the people who live there, people who come in offering different programming, such as music, art, pet therapy, surrounding community. This idea is reciprocal care, and friend is paramount. Could we hear more about the theme of friendship and how to nurture that in care homes from the panelists?
If I could just add one small thing, I did a large study about 10 years ago on friendships among people with dementia living in long-term care. And just one thing that we found was that staff often didn't view people living in long-term care as being capable of cultivating friendships with other residents. And so despite the fact that most people spend their time in these care facilities, the idea that you could be friends with someone in the facility was not something that was regularly accepted. It was as if the staff had to be the conduit for relationships. So we spent 6 months and again, this is for people living with dementia, but 6 months doing observations and interviews with people and staff, and found that there were flourishing friendships that existed, but they were often interrupted by staff. So you might have two people at a table, and it might take them 15 minutes to get a conversation started because of the complications with cognitive difficulties. Conversation starts, a staff member comes up, "Hey Joe," conversation over. Or "Do you want coffee?" Or "It's time for your medicine." Or so it was interesting that that most of the emphasis was on external people coming in to provide the friendship. But there's a lot of friendships that happen even when people have difficulty communicating, even when people have profound forgetfulness, people could recognize a person and know that that was their friend. So I don't mean to hijack that, but it's a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. But
Sure. Yeah. And I guess I can just build on that a little bit too with, I made mention to one study in particular, but I think just the whole sort of, acceptance of friendships, and that they have friends, before the move to long-term care that, ideally are maintained and supported, the welcoming of friends to come into the home, the encouragement of it, certainly quality leisure programming, amongst other things. That's sort of my area that I'm a bit more knowledgeable about. So certainly quality leisure programming is one aspect that helps with that, because, as I made mention to before, but if people, enjoy coming in, if it's not a hardship, certainly they want to, I think the best of intentions are there to continue to visit with a friend after a move to long-term care. But if you go in and you feel like you're in the way of the care provision that's happening, or if it's not a nice environment and not a pleasant environment to be in, it's going to make continuing those visits very, very difficult to do. It's going to be a hardship more than something you look forward to. But if we can sort of get on board and support that, that's an integral part of life, right? And it should be encouraged. And, coming back to, I think, an earlier point about the resources too, I remember thinking whenever we were able to support friends to come alongside, residents, outings in the community, sometimes though that was a resource issue with so many spaces on the bus, right? Or something along those lines. But if they, could even just go to that space to our final destination, and get there on their own and take part in that, it really was a mutually enjoyable experience more often than not. And then it encourages not just friends, but family to want to keep coming in and to visit regularly and to be a key part of life, both in the home and, as I, also touched on, I think it's really important to have and support residents to, continue to be part of their own communities outside of the home as well. So friendship is, it's, and to hear that it's not always, and certainly I think that's not just staff who maybe think that. Sometimes family members as well perhaps might think, oh, after, a diagnosis of dementia in particular, oh, they probably won't remember, oh, it's not as important anymore for someone to visit because they won't know. But I think a lot of that comes down to education too, for, that the importance of friendship, and it continues to be important and an important part of their lives.
Did you want to add?
We have a question. Oh, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I just want to add that, like as Chinese, we have mahjong, and mahjong. When the 4 people are sitting at the table playing mahjong, you know that friendship creates naturally, and you cannot really disturb them because you cannot interrupt the games, and also during music therapy group sessions, sometimes what I feel is that I totally agree with the UK that sometimes it's just giving them the opportunity, the space, and the time, sometimes through playing music or doing artwork, they naturally would connect with each other. Some will help the others to hold instruments, some will help them to play, some will give them the instruments to play. Like, you can see interactions like that. It's just not to disturb them, let that happen.
So that just made me think in your intervention, thank you, because I think that was really important. I'm glad that you shared that with us. It made me think of some of the work that's been done around grief and attending to grief in long-term care, and recognizing that people are aware that somebody has left or has died. And in one of the studies that I was a part of, not attending to that was considered an obstacle to providing good care. So in some promising practices that were identified in another study I was part of, was lighting candles, or putting objects in a special space reserved that is public to everybody, so that we recognize that a life was lost. Because there are relationships, they're not always friendships, but there are relationships that people have with each other, and there is recognition of a loss a lot of times. So it's not something that should be simply hidden, but we need to attend to the relationships that exist between residents, certainly, and between everybody who is part of that space. So I just wanted to add that as well.
Thank you. One quick thing to add to that that I didn't mention earlier is sometimes, though, I think I would consider this to be a really great skill of staff to have, is to be attentive and obviously learn a lot about individual residents, their histories, things that they enjoy, and almost play, I don't want to say a matchmaker role, but in a sense, that's what it is. If if I know a certain resident really enjoys something or came from a certain part of the world as another resident, then I'm much more able to introduce and make those connections, which helps new relationships build after a move into long-term care. It might take a bit more time. It'll certainly come out when the conditions are right and support that exchange between residents. But I think staff can really help with that as well, or help facilitate some of those connections and discussions, which I think is great.
Did you have a question?
Hi, thank you so much. I'd like to return back to the funding, because what I'm hearing is that every province has different procedures and policies in place. I thought I had heard somewhere that there was going to be a federal program to standardize care for older adults and people living in care facilities. My experience as a chef and also somebody who volunteered in CHLDs and RPAs with pet-assisted therapy is that there really is a lack of funding and a lack of standardization as far as work conditions. I saw so much black mold everywhere. I saw depressed employees. I saw not enough staff. Personally, I had friends who went into the Quebec's PAB, was a PAB orderly training 3 years ago. I had to lend them money. They weren't getting paid. Then they didn't stay in the program over a year. How are we going to fund? How are we going to pay for people to take care of those who have built our country and sustained our societies for all these years. Right now, my mom is doing great. She's been able to take care of herself. She bought an apartment in an autonomous living facility. But my fear is that in maybe, I don't know, we hope that she stays healthy, but eventually, if she does need to go to the other side and have care, she's not going to be able to get it in English, because the people that are being trained, they're being trained in French. They're using a lot of temporary, newly arrived immigrants who have to learn French within 6 months or within a year, whatever it is. I'm not understanding how we're moving forward as a society and taking care of our parents, our grandparents, and then eventually us in the future. It's not sustainable.
Anyone want to take that?
All right. I don't have a promising practice to suggest to address. I mean, you raised a number of issues there. There is, and I can't remember the name of it, but something being negotiated between the NDP and the Liberals at the provincial level. But healthcare is under provincial jurisdiction, and the Quebec government here is very, very interested in maintaining their autonomy from the federal government. So even if there is something put in place, that is not going to have an impact here, because Quebec will, in my opinion, that will not happen, that it will agree to national standards informing the standards here. So that's one answer to your question. I agree with what you're saying. We need the resources. We need more people concerned about this. I don't know what to say beyond that. You mentioned advocacy earlier. I mentioned the group that is taking on the privatization of long-term care. Like, there are multiple different things that people are doing. So one way to contribute to hopefully what it will be a better long-term care in the future, because I don't think we're in a state of having really great long-term care at the moment, is just all of us doing our part and recognizing that, yeah, this is our responsibility. People deserve to live in good conditions, and people who are providing that work deserve to have decent working conditions, get paid properly. As you said, that this person is not being paid. This is obviously a serious problem, but even being paid a living wage within a context of, our economic context currently. So there are a lot of issues that need to be addressed, but as long as each of us are doing our part, and hopefully more people will become concerned about this. I don't have anything else.
Yes.
Thank you. No, I know it's a huge basket. I'm also working with Eva Marsden Center in NDG. I'm going to tell you, my friend Miranda Potts, she's worked off her feet. She works till 3 a.m, to put on these programs for us in NDG. She needs support staff. 20 years ago, there would have been Miranda and at least two people helping her. She's on her own, and I'm sorry, but I don't believe in the scarcity of funds. I just believe that there are people who are not willing to distribute those funds. So I'm being a little bit of a devil's advocate here, or a lot, but we really need to pressure our governments and our people who have the opportunity to give us that money, tell them how important it is to look at humanity. Because here in Quebec, they just found $603 million to protect the French language. And there's no money for teachers or healthcare, and that includes long-term care. There are 550 CHLDs in Quebec. Only 12 of them are private. All the rest are public.
Yeah, I agree that it's about political choices. I don't think that the funding isn't there. I hope I didn't communicate that earlier. I don't agree with that position either. I think these are political choices, and we need to make the choice politically to fund this sector properly, and that hasn't been done yet.
So we are now at 12:30 at time. I wonder if this, for real this time, it was just a drill last time. But I wondered if you would please help me in thanking the panelists, and thank you for being here. And it was a lovely, wonderful, stimulating conversation. Are there any announcements for anything else?
I can just thank everyone again for coming in to Force Space for this conversation. Thank you for the space. Thank you to those of you joining us on Zoom, and also everyone who's come all for the last week or more for all of the events. Bold 2024. It's been fantastic from behind this desk, and we'll be sad to close up for this. But those of you joining us on Zoom, we are going to close up the Zoom. We are going to close up the live stream. But remember, this is available on our YouTube channel, as are all of the other events that happened over the weeks. And you should definitely check those out. Thank you.
Thank you. On behalf of Engage and the ACT Lab,
I just want to say on behalf of Engage and the ACT Lab, I want to thank all of you for being here. Many of you have come to many of the events, and we really appreciate your attendance, and we'll be looking forward to some feedback. I want to thank the Fourth Space for being so fantastic to work with, and big round of applause to all the students and postdocs and who've done so much work this week. Cleaning off tables, sweeping floors, making sure the pets are, motored up, and getting the scam room going, and taking care of plants and taking care of people. That's what it's about. And finally, to this wonderful panel this morning, not only talking about what doesn't work, but some things that do work, and thinking about asking the important question of where are we putting time, energy, resources as a society, and how can we also learn from each other and continue to work together. Finally, I just want to thank Constance Lafontaine, who did so much work doing the programming, getting everything together, going to meeting after meeting on our behalf with the Fourth Space, and for being here each and every day from early in the morning till late at night. So Constance, wonderful work.
Thank you, and thank you, Kim, who is the director of both ACT and Engage. So double whammy to have Kim on both sides of this. I want to reiterate all the thank yous for everybody who's been here, and we really hope that this is just the start of collaborations. We've met so many new people, also old friends coming back. So this was great about the last time we did Bold here in the Fourth Space, is that so much of what we started here continued. It's still continuing today. So we hope that the same thing happens. So we hope that all of you will be in touch. If you don't have our number, if you don't have our email, come and see us. We'll give it to you. And we just want to find other opportunities to all work together and to work on these socially urgent issues together. Thank you.
I declare Bold over, but we will go boldly forth together.